Hello and welcome to Sullivan Financial Planning. This is Kristi Sullivan. You've stumbled onto my YouTube channel. Thanks for clicking and watching. One thing I'm going to talk about today, which is a little different, has to do with ETFs or exchange traded funds. I have a lot of people come up to me and say, oh, well, they don't come up to me. I mean, not at a party and say this, but maybe, just in the course of an appointment would say, I think I need to be invested in ETFs. And I always say, well, what makes you think that? And they usually say something like, well, I read about it in a magazine or I heard about it on TV, and everyone says you should get into ETFs because they're cheaper. So, let's talk about that. You get a lot of advice on TV and in the media about investing in low-cost investment options, and that's great. But often people aren't looking under the hood and seeing, well, what is this investment option, and what does it even mean, and is it right for me? So let me first say what an ETF is. An exchange-traded fund is simply a type of a mutual fund. So it's a basket of stocks or bonds. There is usually a stated purpose to it. ETFs tend to get really narrow. There can be ETFs that are tracking the Standard & Poor's 500, which is the U.S. stock market. Those are how they started off. There can also be ETFs that track, the chin hairs of a pashmina goat used to make cashmere sweaters market. That's extreme, but there can be very narrow and specific ETFs out there as well. So just because it's an ETF doesn't mean it's right for your portfolio necessarily, so you have to think about that. The big difference between ETFs and mutual funds is that ETFs trade all day long like a stock. And if I want to buy an ETF, instead of buying it directly from the mutual fund company, I'm usually buying it from another person out there in the world who's trying to sell their ETF. So I'm buying and selling it on the secondary market. A mutual fund, on the other hand, if you buy a mutual fund share, you're buying it straight from the mutual fund company. And when you go to redeem that share, you're getting the money straight from the mutual fund company. There's no secondary market for trading mutual fund shares. ETFs do trade all day long, like a stock, because that's what they basically are classified as. Mutual funds only price once a day. So if you put in an order to buy a mutual fund, you will buy it after the market close at whatever pricing is created by the underlying holdings of the mutual fund. ETFs are also priced kind of based on the underlying holdings of the fund. So whatever the group or the basket of stocks or bonds is worth at the end of the day or at the middle of the day or at the early part of the day when you're going to trade it, that's pretty much what the ETF is based on, but it's also based on demand for that share on the secondary market. So if the stock market is in free fall because of some bad news and you want to sell your ETF, well, you have to find a buyer for it, and maybe you won't. And maybe that will depress the price of your ETF shares that you're trying to sell even more than the price of the underlying stocks are shrinking. So I just wanted to point out the differences between ETF trading and mutual fund trading. I believe that you should be careful and be cautious while you're choosing one product or over another. If you're not a real active trader, mutual funds might be the better solution for you. If you are an active trader and you like the idea of being able to get in and out of a holding anytime during the day, well, then ETFs will be more appealing. ETFs are not always less expensive than comparable mutual funds, so it makes sense to compare the two and see if you're comparing apples to apples correctly. That's about all I had. It was a quick tutorial on just some thoughts I had about trading ETFs versus holding mutual funds. I hope it helped clarify a little bit about the differences between the two products and make you think a little bit. Again, just because the media says you need it doesn't mean you do necessarily. You have to think about what's right for you personally. I hope this was helpful. Please, if you'd like to schedule a time to meet with me, you can check out my website at www.sullivanfinancialplanning.com.